October 29, 2018, a brand new Boeing 737 MAX plunges into the Java Sea just 13 minutes after takeoff, claiming the lives of 189 people. But here's what's terrifying. The pilots were fighting against their own plane, battling automated software they didn't even know existed. Barely 5 months later, it happens again, this time claiming 157 lives. Within days, aviation authorities worldwide grounded the entire MAX fleet, costing Boeing nearly $20 billion. But the nightmare didn't end there. In January of 2024, a door plug violently rips off mid-flight at 16,000 feet on an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737 MAX. The shocking part? The plane was barely 10 weeks old, and to the investigators' surprise, they found that 4 critical bolts were simply never installed. Now, you might assume that these problems were limited to the MAX program, but that was not the case. Instead, this was just the tip of the iceberg. The 777X, Boeing's flagship wide-body project, experienced an uncommanded pitch event during a 2020 test flight, prompting concerns about the design's maturity on this type. But then came the bombshell revelations. Sam Salipur, a Boeing 777 and 787 quality engineer, alleged that the company dismissed safety and quality concerns when workers were literally forcing misaligned fuselage sections together, leaving invisible structural gaps that could tear the aircraft apart after repeated flight cycles. John Barnett, another quality manager at Boeing's South Carolina plant, alleged that managers pressured workers to install defective parts, retrieved literally from scrap bins, to meet deadlines. But these aren't just isolated incidents, they're systematic quality control failures that plague Boeing's production lines today. So how did Boeing go from the best to the worst aviation company in less than a decade? To understand how far Boeing has fallen, we must first appreciate how high they once stood. The 1990s represented Boeing's golden age, a period when the company embodied American engineering excellence. In 1993, Boeing launched the 737 Next Generation, a revolutionary upgrade featuring fully digital design, improved fuel efficiency, and higher passenger capacity. Airlines couldn't order them fast enough. By the time production concluded, nearly 7,000 737NGs had taken to the skies, cementing its position as one of the best-selling commercial aircraft generations in history. But Boeing wasn't resting on the 737's laurels. In 1995, they unveiled the 777, a revolutionary wide-body aircraft that showcased Boeing's engineering prowess. It was the first commercial aircraft designed entirely using computer-aided design. The development process emphasized collaboration, with a working-together philosophy that brought engineers, suppliers, and even airline customers into the design process from day one. The result? A spectacularly successful aircraft that remains the world's most popular wide-body plane even 3 decades later. Boeing in the 1990s was more than a successful company. It was an American institution. It represented engineering excellence, innovation, and the pride of American manufacturing. When Boeing planes rolled off the assembly line, they carried with them decades of accumulated expertise and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Then everything changed in 1997, when Boeing merged with Macdonald Douglas.
Good evening, everyone. It is a multi-billion-dollar deal that is sending shockwaves through the aerospace industry.
While it appeared Boeing had acquired its struggling competitor, many insiders describe it differently. Macdonald Douglas essentially bought Boeing with Boeing's own money, and what was about to happen would prove this statement right. On paper, it was a merger, but in reality, it was a collision of cultures. Macdonald Douglas operated primarily as a military contractor, where a fundamentally different business philosophy prevailed. In defense contracting, manufacturers typically incorporate development costs directly into government contracts. This reality shaped Macdonald Douglas's entire approach: bid aggressively low to win contracts, then ruthlessly control costs during execution. Macdonald Douglas executives, many mentored by General Electric's Jack Welch, brought a philosophy that prioritized quarterly earnings and shareholder returns above all else. Welch had pioneered policies like annually firing the bottom 10% of managers while lavishly rewarding top performers, a Darwinian approach that boosted financial indicators but devastated workplace culture. Boeing's CEO, Phil Condit, was an engineer at heart, brilliant in design but perhaps too conflict-averse in management. He admired Welch's approach and increasingly relied on advice from former Macdonald Douglas executives who'd worked directly under Welch. Slowly but unmistakably, Boeing's culture began tilting away from engineering excellence towards shareholder profits and quarterly performance metrics. The symbolic breaking point came in 2001 when Condit moved Boeing's headquarters from Seattle, its home for 85 years, to Chicago. His justification? Management needed distance from day-to-day operations on how to build planes to focus on strategic thinking. However, in reality, this move was heavily motivated by $60 million in state and local tax credits, which led to the separation of Boeing's executives and engineers. The working together motto that Condit himself had championed began cracking apart. When Condit resigned following a military contract scandal, his replacement was Harry Stonecipher, the last CEO of Macdonald Douglas, who championed the merger. Speaking about his tenure years later, Stonecipher was remarkably candid. When people say I changed the culture of Boeing, that was the intent, so that it was going to be run like a business, rather than a great engineering firm. By 2003, this transformed Boeing leadership and they faced a challenge. They wanted to build a revolutionary new aircraft, the 787 Dreamliner, but investors were tired of the traditional cycle of massive upfront investment, followed by years of waiting for profitability. Boeing's board made a stunning declaration. They would develop this groundbreaking aircraft for less than half what they'd spent on the 777 a decade earlier. Moreover, they would introduce unprecedented technological innovations, including the first majority composite airframe in commercial aviation history, a complete revolution in how jetliners had always been constructed. But how could they possibly develop a cutting-edge composite aircraft with entirely new technologies while spending half as much? The answer came from Macdonald Douglas's playbook. In the 1990s, when Macdonald Douglas was struggling financially, the company developed a desperate but innovative approach for their MD-95 program, risk-sharing partnerships. Instead of Macdonald Douglas paying suppliers to build components to their specifications, suppliers would design, engineer, and manufacture components at their own expense. They would only recoup their investment if the aircraft succeeded in the marketplace. While this strategy was suitable for a struggling manufacturer, it wasn't a viable option for a successful aviation company like Boeing. In fact, the MD-95, which was rebranded as the Boeing 717 after the merger, flopped commercially, selling only 155 planes, meaning suppliers never truly recouped their investments. Despite this cautionary tale, Boeing's new leadership saw this as their solution. They saw the 787 as an opportunity to apply this strategy on an unprecedented scale. They would assemble a global network of risk-sharing partners. Major sections of the aircraft would be designed and built by suppliers worldwide. Japanese industrial conglomerates would build wings. Italy's Alenia Aeronautica would handle fuselage sections, and American contractors like Vought Aircraft Industries would manufacture other critical components. Most crucially, these suppliers wouldn't just manufacture parts, they would design them, and they would pay for the development themselves. Boeing's role would transform from manufacturer to systems integrator. They would simply assemble pieces delivered from around the world, like sophisticated Lego blocks clicking together. For suppliers, this was an extraordinarily bad deal. They would invest hundreds of millions in development costs with no guarantee of success. However, the truth was, they had no choice. Boeing's negotiating leverage was simply enormous. Controlling half the global commercial aircraft market, any Boeing contract was better than no Boeing contract. Suppliers signed on, and Boeing's plan to build aviation's most advanced aircraft at a fraction of traditional development costs moved forward. Now, some might think, even Airbus uses risk-sharing partnerships. What's wrong with it? You see, what Boeing was about to do was something entirely different. Where Airbus worked with a handful of carefully selected Tier 1 suppliers under constant oversight, Boeing contracted with approximately 50 risk-sharing partners scattered globally. Where Airbus retained direct control over design specifications and integration, Boeing delegated fundamental engineering authority to suppliers, and then dramatically reduced its own oversight staff, operating under the assumption that everything would somehow just work. Picture this: 50 different companies, from Japan to Italy, each designing a piece of an aircraft without truly coordinating with each other, all hoping their work would somehow fit together perfectly at Boeing's assembly plant. It was extreme outsourcing taken to a level never attempted before in the aerospace industry, an experiment that would have devastating consequences. This created a coordination nightmare that would soon become apparent. The 787 development quickly descended into chaos. When components started arriving at Boeing's Everett facility in Washington, engineers discovered horrifying quality issues everywhere. Sections from Alenia Aeronautica in Italy arrived filled with metal shavings, tools, and debris. Basic manufacturing cleanliness had been ignored. Fasteners weren't properly installed. Boeing had to completely disassemble and rebuild entire sections, components which Boeing assumed would arrive flight-ready. Vought aircraft in Charleston, South Carolina faced even worse problems. They'd constructed massive facilities for composite manufacturing, but couldn't get processes working consistently. Sections arrived with gaps, wrinkles in composite layers, and structural defects. Their production rate? 1/10 of what Boeing needed. Spirit AeroSystems in Wichita, remember this name because it's about to become central to our story, was building forward fuselages but struggled with misdrilled holes, incorrect tolerances, and integration nightmares. But the deeper issue was more fundamental. Spirit had been asked to handle design work they'd never performed at this level of complexity. By late 2006, Boeing engineers made a devastating discovery. They didn't actually know what their suppliers were doing. Boeing had drastically reduced engineering oversight staff, assuming suppliers would manage independently. Now they realized suppliers were behind schedule, drowning in complexity and producing inconsistent quality. Nobody had planned for how to fix these problems. When Boeing finally rolled out the first 787 for media and dignitaries on July 8, 2007, observers noticed something disturbing: a hollow shell that lacked many major operating systems, and was only held together with temporary fasteners. The actual production was significantly behind the public schedule. It was prepared for distant photographs, but certainly not for flight. As the 787 program hemorrhaged money and credibility, Boeing faced an existential dilemma. Customers were furious, demanding compensation. Even worse, the suppliers were running out of money. They couldn't sustain these losses. If suppliers failed, the entire program would collapse. So Boeing had no choice but to intervene. Vought was in the worst condition. Their Charleston facility was bleeding cash, quality remained terrible, and they couldn't even meet production requirements. In 2009, Boeing made a painful decision to acquire them. They paid approximately $580 million for Vaught's stake in Charleston operations, assumed responsibility for the troubled facility, and deployed hundreds of Boeing engineers to fix manufacturing processes. But the Vought situation was pale compared to Spirit AeroSystems, and that's where things get truly absurd. Let's understand Spirit's history. For decades, Boeing's Wichita, Kansas factory had built Boeing fuselages, shipping them cross-country by rail for final assembly in Seattle. This facility had constructed some of Boeing's most iconic planes. In fact, it was an integral part of Boeing. Then, in the early 2000s, as part of the financial engineering strategy sweeping through Boeing under Macdonald Douglas influenced leadership, they decided to divest. They'd already sold facilities in St. Louis, Spokane, Corinth, and Irving. Now Wichita's turn had come. In 2005, Boeing sold this facility, with its 13,000 experienced employees and decades of institutional knowledge, to private equity firm Onyx Corporation for just $900 million. Boeing's leadership celebrated this divestiture. It removed assets from the balance sheet, generated immediate cash, and aligned with the asset-light strategy popular in business schools. But this decision would prove catastrophically expensive. As the 787 struggled, Spirit, now Boeing's largest supplier, producing 70% of 737 fuselages and critical 787 sections, began failing. Boeing was forced to provide emergency support, over $1 billion in advance payments between 2007 and 2008, just to keep Spirit financially viable. They stationed over 600 Boeing engineers permanently at Spirit facilities in Wichita, essentially running quality control and manufacturing oversight themselves. Think about this absurdity. Boeing was paying Spirit to build parts, then paying its own engineers to ensure Spirit did it correctly. Engineers Boeing could have simply kept when they owned the facility. By 2010, Boeing's supposedly capital-light 787 program had spent billions in unplanned supplier support, acquired facilities never intended for ownership, hired thousands of engineers they'd planned to avoid hiring, fallen over 3 years behind schedule, with staggering financial losses. While Boeing was still extracting itself from the 787 quagmire, Airbus was preparing a masterstroke. In late 2010, Airbus shocked the industry by launching the A320 Neo, the existing A320 family, re-engined with new, larger, ultra-efficient power plants, promising 15% fuel savings. This was a massive improvement that would appeal to cost-conscious airlines worldwide. Airbus had studied Boeing's situation carefully. They knew Boeing's top engineers and finances remained tied up in the troubled 787. Building an all-new narrow-body would take years, which Boeing didn't have. Time Airbus would use to steal market share in Boeing's most profitable segment. In February 2011, Boeing's CEO James McNerney told analysts Boeing was leaning toward developing an all-new aircraft, but acknowledged this wouldn't enter service until around 2020, giving Airbus nearly a decade's head start. That's when Airbus executed their trap. They identified the perfect target, American Airlines. American had precisely the right combination of circumstances: a fleet of aging, fuel-inefficient MD-80s desperately needing replacement, and an inability to wait another decade for Boeing's new aircraft. When Boeing first learned American Airlines was negotiating with Airbus for 400 aircraft, they initially dismissed it. Boeing relied on an old agreement stating American would buy exclusively from them, an agreement that technically wasn't enforceable after the Macdonald Douglas merger, but Boeing hoped it carried moral weight. When talks progressed seriously, Boeing threatened legal action, but they quickly realized this deal would happen regardless, and that's when they fell directly into Airbus's trap. In less than 48 hours, Boeing abandoned plans for an all-new composite twin-aisle mid-size jet. Instead, they switched to Plan B, fitting new engines to the aging 737 NG design, creating what would become the 737 MAX. On July 20th, 2011, American Airlines announced deals with both Airbus and Boeing for 460 single-aisle aircraft, then the world's largest aircraft order.
American will acquire 460 narrow-body planes from the Boeing 737 and Airbus A320 families of aircraft beginning in 2013.
But if you look at American's press release from that day, you won't find 737 MAX mentioned anywhere. The deal happened so rapidly that Boeing's marketing team hadn't even named the aircraft yet. It was simply referenced as the new evolution of the 737 NG. Boeing now faced a profound engineering challenge. The new, larger, more fuel-efficient engines physically couldn't fit under the 737's wings in their traditional position, due to the airframe, which sat too low to the ground. So Boeing decided to mount engines farther forward and higher up than previous 737 generations. But this placement fundamentally altered the aircraft's aerodynamic characteristics. During certain flight conditions, particularly at high angles of attack, the MAX had a tendency to pitch nose up more aggressively than earlier 737 variants. Boeing faced a choice. Admit this was essentially a different aircraft requiring extensive pilot retraining, or find a workaround. Retraining would have been expensive for airlines, making the MAX less attractive compared to Airbus's A320 Neo, which maintained commonality with earlier A320 family training. Boeing chose the workaround. They developed MCAS, a software program that would automatically push the nose down during specific conditions, making the MAX feel like a 737 NG to pilots. This system was quietly added with minimal documentation. Most critically, Boeing convinced regulators that pilots transitioning from earlier 737s to the MAX needed no extra simulator training. Instead, a few hours of iPad-based differences training would be sufficient. This decision, driven by competitive and financial pressures rather than engineering best practices, would prove fatal. Most pilots flying the MAX had no idea this system even existed until it malfunctioned, and started fighting them for control of their aircraft, leading to 2 catastrophic crashes on brand new MAX jets. The financial devastation from the aftermath was staggering. The 20-month grounding cost Boeing approximately $20 billion in compensation, lost orders, and penalties. But most importantly, Boeing's reputation for safety and reliability was gone. But there was another victim: Boeing's suppliers. The MAX grounding meant Boeing completely shut down production for months. For suppliers, this was brutal. They made massive layoffs to conserve cash, losing their most experienced workers in the process. Their market valuations plummeted. Companies like Spirit AeroSystems, already strained from the 787 debacle, now faced catastrophic financial pressure. And when suppliers are financially desperate, quality suffers. Spirit-built 737 fuselages began showing multiple defects: improperly installed fasteners, metal shavings left in fuel tanks, and structural issues requiring extensive rework. The relationship between Boeing and its former Kansas division deteriorated into bitter fighting. Spirit has been responsible for defect after defect that slipped past quality assurance, a direct consequence of the financial and operational chaos Boeing's decisions created. Post-MAX grounding, Boeing desperately tried to rebuild its reputation, but Spirit kept creating problems. Then came January 2024. The door plug blowout on Alaska Airlines Flight 1282. Investigation revealed Spirit had failed to properly install 4 critical bolts. This wasn't a design flaw or a subtle engineering error, it was a basic manufacturing failure, making global headlines and triggering yet another crisis of confidence in Boeing's operational methods and safety culture. Today, Boeing's troubles persist across multiple programs. The 737 MAX family continues experiencing issues to this very day. In 2021, Boeing discovered problems with the anti-icing system, prompting airworthiness directives. Certification of the MAX 7 and MAX 10 variants faces years of delays as regulators scrutinize every system with renewed intensity after the crashes. Airlines that ordered these variants are reconsidering their fleet plans entirely. The 777X, Boeing's next-generation wide-body flagship, has become another expensive disappointment. The program has experienced structural issues during testing, including an uncommanded pitch event during a 2020 flight that could have proved catastrophic. The 777X test fleet was grounded in August 2024 due to a structural issue with the engine thrust links, which connect the engine to the wing. Inspections found cracks in these titanium components, requiring Boeing to pause flight testing to redesign, replace, and validate the fixes. Originally planned for 2020 delivery, the 777X now won't enter service until 2026 at the earliest, and that timeline remains uncertain. These cascading delays and quality problems have forced Boeing to suspend future programs entirely. The proposed 797, a new middle-market aircraft that could have been Boeing's path forward, remains indefinitely shelved. Boeing simply cannot commit resources to new development while struggling to fix existing programs and restore basic manufacturing competence. Boeing's leadership finally acknowledged the fundamental problem. They cannot fix quality and safety while critical suppliers operate independently with misaligned incentives. In July 2024, Boeing announced it would acquire Spirit AeroSystems for approximately $4.7 billion in stock, plus assumption of $3.5 billion in Spirit's debt. Total transaction value around $8.3 billion. Let that sink in. Boeing sold this facility in 2005 for $900 million. They then spent nearly 2 decades and billions more propping Spirit up financially. Now they're buying it back for $8.3 billion, paying roughly 9 times what they sold it for. Boeing's then CEO, David Calhoun, admitted the acquisition was fundamentally about safety and quality, a tacit acknowledgement that the outsourcing model had catastrophically failed. In the end, Boeing lost over $30 billion in the 787 program alone, $20 billion from the MAX crisis, ongoing costs from delayed programs, and now $8 billion to reacquire a supplier they once owned. Decisions that were born out of greed ended in a disaster, which will be remembered for years to come. Today, Boeing's fall from grace represents one of the most expensive failed experiments in aerospace history, because Boeing forgot something fundamental. Manufacturing excellence isn't built through cost-cutting and supplier pressure. It's built through investment in people and obsessive attention to detail. It requires working together toward a common goal, focusing on thousands of small things rather than quarterly earnings. Boeing systematically dismantled all of this in pursuit of higher stock prices and faster returns. And they paid the price.